All right, let's try, Physics Fam, one of our new acceleration word problems. If we read this out for number one, if Mr. J starts from rest and attains velocity of 5.34 meters per second in 10 seconds, what is his acceleration? All right, first things first is I'm given a few pieces of important information. First of all, I start from rest. So that means that my initial velocity is 0 meters per second. And then I finally get to a final velocity, it states, of 5.34 meters per second. So already I have a few pieces of important information. It also said that I did all of this, I changed this velocity in a total of 10 seconds. So I have quite a bit of given for me. Now, my unknown in the question, the thing I'm looking for is acceleration. So that is, of course, my unknown. But lucky for us, from physics class, we know that average acceleration is really just the final velocity minus the initial velocity, sorry, I have trouble with my negative sign, divided by time. All right, so let's substitute in the numbers that we already have. I don't have acceleration, but I do have, for my final velocity, 5.34 meters per second minus 0 meters per second for my initial velocity divided by a total of 10. When I carry that through, I'm going to get 5.34 divided by 10, since 5.34 minus 0 is no big deal. It just becomes 5.34. And now when I write out to solve my problem, I end up getting 0.534. Let's look at the units, right? If we're looking at units, our velocities are in meters per second, and our time is in seconds. So when I divide that out, it's going to be meters per second, or another way to write that would be 0.534 meters per second squared. Hope that helped with your first one. That's a nice straightforward one, but again, we're using our vector quantities of velocity and acceleration. Good luck. All right, let's try another problem. Number 5 from our homework has a student is chasing after another student. The student ends up with a velocity of 8.78 meters per second, and it takes the student 4.5 seconds to get to that speed. Now the student has an acceleration of 2.34 meters per second squared, and we want to know what the student's initial velocity is. All right, so we're given a lot of information. Let's start organizing. First of all, the student ends up with a velocity. Ends up means my final velocity is 8.78 meters per second. It takes the student 4.5 seconds to get to that speed. So that's a time to me. So that's 4.5 seconds. And then it says the student's acceleration was a positive 2.34 meters per second squared. Okay? My unknown, according to my problem, is I want to know what my initial velocity is. But lucky for us, we already know there's an equation that relates all of these guys together, and that is acceleration is equal to final velocity minus initial velocity over time. All right, well, let's start plugging in some of those numbers. For my acceleration, I have 2.34. For my velocity final, I have 8.78 meters per second. I do not have my initial velocity. I'll have to solve for that. But my time is 4.5 seconds. Okay, well, let's start doing the work on this. First, I have to get velocity initial by itself, so I will multiply both sides by 4.5. Throwing that in my calculator, I end up getting about 10.53 is equal to 8.78 minus velocity initial. Don't forget, because I multiplied by 4.5 on this side, that cancels out. Now, since I'm going to subtract by velocity initial, I really want to get that to be positive. So I'm going to add velocity initial to both sides, and I'm going to end up getting then velocity initial plus 10.53 equals 8.78. Whoops, wrote that backwards. 78. Sorry about that. All right, now that we have that alone, what am I going to do? Subtract 10.53 to both sides. Negative 10.53. Those cancel out, and I'm left with velocity initial is equal to negative 1.75. And since we're dealing with velocity, if we look over here, velocity started meters per second. So that means that my units for initial velocity would be meters per second as well. The question is, why is it a negative velocity? Well, negative is direction, remember? So it's not like having a negative speed. It just means that this student was moving 1.75 meters per second originally, but was also moving in the backwards direction. When the student was finally up to its final speed or final velocity, that student was moving forward. So something to think about, vector quantities, very important. Negative or positives mean direction. All right, hopefully this was good to walk through and I gave you a little bit of help. Best of luck, physics fan.